So while we're pulling up Dr. Gunion here, so it's the same parcel. Will this be similar to earlier today? They're not going to have the same thing to say. I assume one's covering one component, one's covering another component.
That's correct. So they have two parcels, and what Dr. Gunion is everything else, and Beth will be the interactions with Summit specifically.
Oh, okay. Tracking, I think. Okay. We'll work our way through it. Okay. Dr. Gunion, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, go ahead. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate?
Yes, to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Mr. Jorde.
Please state your name.
Mark Gunion.
And, sir, do you own property in Greene County, Iowa that is presently being targeted by the proposed Summit Hazardous Pipeline?
I am one of the owners. There's a 50% interest from the Bush Family Trust and a 50% interest from Gunion Family Farm.
Okay, and you're part of the Gunion Family Farm?
Yes, sir.
All right, and as part of your preparation and opposition to this Summit proposal, have you caused to be prepared pre-filed testimony with the exhibits?
Yes.
And if we walk through that same testimony, the questions posed to you in that testimony that was written, would you today give substantially the same answers?
Yes.
And in the meantime, since you caused that testimony to be filed, have you come up with any material updates or changes that are necessary to discuss?
There are some corrections which are minor typos and wordings, if that's worth the time. And I do have a number of updates of things since I've learned since I submitted the pre-filed testimony.
If you think the corrections in terms of like a word or tense or something like that are material, go right ahead. If not, let's just skip to the updates.
Okay, let's skip.
Okay. What update do you have?
Well, I have more information on the pipeline routing change that we requested. I have spoke with the emergency response manager for Greene County. I have a little bit more information on the pipeline risk for accidents. I have further information on CO2 toxicity as it might apply to self-rescue.
So of those, when you talk about route change, is the update you want to make to an alternative route suggestion or to the existing proposed route?
We submitted a proposed alternative route, and since that time, there are a couple of things that have happened which we think should have attention.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we first offer into evidence exhibits 75 through 80 and 600 and, strike that. Let's offer into evidence exhibits 218 through 221 and 630, please.
Are there objections?
Assuming that that is the pre-filed testimony and attachments plus 630, there is no objection.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I would like some clarification on which set of testimony. There's one that was filed on July 20th that Mr. Gunion was a part of for this farm. There was another one of July 24th for the same farm that he is not listed as a participant in. And so I just would like some clarification as to which testimony is going to be admitted for these parcels.
Mr. Jorde?
Well, so anything that that we've got Gunion on is what I'm offering.
Does that answer your question?
It does not, Your Honor. Again, there's testimony that was filed on July 20th that Mr. Mark Gunion is listed as being a part of. There's testimony that was filed on July 24th for the Gunion Family Trust, Bush Family Trust, that Mr. Mark Gunion is not listed as a participant in. But that was the later testimony. And so that's why I'm asking for clarification as to which set of testimony council is looking at having admitted.
I'll offer all of it. Then he's part of the Gunion family trust, and obviously individually, so I'll offer all of it.
Is that, do you have further objections or clarification?
Your Honor, they're duplicative, and so it'll be difficult to figure out which one we're working with.
Hold on. I don't think Dr. Gunion has signed the affidavit for the filing on the 24th. So I think we are probably, I assume, focusing on the filing from the 21st.
That would be fine.
Are there any more objections?
It would be July 20th, just for clarification.
20th. Thank you. All right. Seeing no more objections, the board will admit.
All right, excellent. So now that's admitted, I want you to clarify, sir, the route or the alternative route modification, and then I'm going to turn you over to other folks.
Is it possible to pull up my pre-filed testimony attachment number 22? That would make it very helpful.
Yes, but can we please do that? Does that look right?
That's it.
All right, perfect. Go right ahead.
So the pink line to the right is the proposed route from Summit, as best I could put it on this map off Google Earth. Our alternative is over to the west. So when Mr. Skobanek and Mr. Burns were going through the route requests on a previous day, Mr. Skobanek mentioned that our change could not be fulfilled because the landowner to the south, the one that has the two wind turbines, had insisted that the pipeline route should be exactly where someone had originally planned it. My sister called the landowner because that sounded odd to both of us, and they talked. To be brief, the landowner did not want that pipeline running through where someone originally proposed it on the right. In fact, he wanted to avoid that area because 3 years ago he put brand new tile in there. What he wanted someone to do was move it over to the left of his property, left of the western wind turbine, approximately where that hand is moving up and down. There's no tile, no new tile over there. That land, he says, drains fine on its own. So he wanted his portion of the pipeline over there. So we wanted it in the same place, unknown to each other for our own purposes. The reason Summit would not give that to him is the land agent kept telling him, the pipeline can't be moved. The pipeline can't be moved. No, the pipeline can't be moved. Then he finally caved in and signed, thinking that the pipeline could not be moved.
Okay, and so then just to clarify, on page 261 of your pre-filed testimony, the attachment 22 we're looking at, are you, sir, standing by, if this is voted through by the board, that the route shown as, quote, our alternative proposed pipeline location is still the alternative you propose, or do you have further modification?
The existing alternative on the exhibit you're looking at is the one we would propose.
Okay. All right. Very good. I think that's clear. With that, I'm going to turn you over for cross-examination questions.
Mr. Taylor? Thank you. Doctor, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club.
Good evening.
And can we go back to the KMZ map, please? Okay. So, are there, it looks like there are at least some structures in the area of your property. Perhaps we can zoom out a little bit. There. Can you explain to us what those various structures are around your property?
Certainly. So if you look to the right of the red parcels, there's a small little farmstead there, and that is the house of our farm. It's the inconspicuous gray rectangle towards the upper right of that little square.
And is that occupied?
It is intermittently occupied when we go to visit there. So my sister and I were there in May, our younger sister, and we were all in that area in January. And my younger sister will be back there again in just a few weeks.
Okay. And then the farther to the south?
So to the south along that same gravel road are the Sandages. They own just the farmstead proper right on the road, and they own the hog confinement buildings just a little farther down the road. They don't own any of the property to the west or between those two little parcels. All that property is owned by Mr. McDowell.
Okay. Well, let's back up a minute. It's my understanding you're a physician?
Yes.
Okay. As a physician, do you have concerns about the safety of the people and the animals in those structures?
Oh, absolutely. It would help to know that in that farmstead owned by the Sandages, the one straight to the right of the wind turbines, Mrs. Sandage runs daycare for some of the local residents. So there's always small children around there. During the summer, there are more because there are small school-age children that show up during the summer. And in those hog confinement pens, there's about 3,600 head.
And so what informs you about the possible risk of the pipeline in that location?
Well, the pipeline is upwind of us. You know, the prevailing winds come from the northwest to the southwest. There's roughly half a mile between the pipeline and those residences and the confinement sheds. And under almost any prevailing wind conditions, anything that comes out of that pipeline is headed straight to those buildings. And you can notice there are lots of wind turbines around there. That's the Beaver Creek wind area. There's 115 of them that I can count from the house there on the farm. So it's pretty windy most of the time, usually from the prevailing directions.
Have you been monitoring or have you reviewed any of the
the testimony of Summit's witnesses in this hearing regarding the safety and the health impacts?
Some of it. I saw Dr. Lumpkin's testimony, the toxicologist. I also reviewed the testimony of Mr. Powell and Mr. Skovanek. I think those are the only ones that I've seen related to pipeline safety.
Okay. And again, as a physician, did you have any disagreement with their testimony?
Oh, how long do we have? So Dr. Lumpkins went through an article that was done on very high concentrations of carbon dioxide given to exceptionally healthy young males in a laboratory setting. And basically the conclusion was, well, you could survive 9% for 10 minutes and not fall over dead, or well, fall over unconscious. If you look at the data and you know anything about human physiology, and I should qualify this here, my background is anesthesiology. So I deal with ventilation and carbon dioxide, or I did before I retired, literally on every case. That's always a consideration. If you look at the volumes that those healthy young men were breathing, most of us couldn't even manage to move that much air per minute. In the 9% carbon dioxide sessions, they were moving 66 liters of air per minute. For example, a normal healthy adult male who's undergoing strenuous exercise might move 40, 45. These guys were just sitting in the chair, breathing as hard as they could, and that was the only thing they could do. They would have no capacity whatever to get up out of that chair for self-rescue. They'd be so confused they couldn't, practically couldn't turn a doorknob. To say that they could function, I think it was functioning coherently for 10 minutes is, I think, an overstatement, just because you can take a pencil and put it through some letters on a piece of paper. Those guys have confronted with a difficult escape plan could not have managed that. In fact, that's something along the lines of what I would like to show later when I said that I had further information on CO2 toxicity as it relates to self-rescue.
Pardon me, if you recall my cross-examination of Dr. Lumpkin, I asked about the nature of the so-called P-test that they did on those subjects. And is it correct that that test doesn't really reveal a person's ability to think or make decisions?
Yeah, the only decision that person has to make is to start doing the test, basically. They're able to follow a simple command, pick up the pencil, do the test. And then if you can tell a P from a D, and that's, most people can do that at a kindergarten level, which may have been, for all I know, the amount of cognitive ability they had left at that point. And also, when you score those tests, a part of the test score is how many lines you get done. So your accuracy is only part of the score. You could be inaccurate and still achieve some score if you just draw enough lines, enough pencil marks on enough lines.
And if there were a rupture of the pipeline and a person was in the area where the plume would be such that they would be seriously affected, would that require some reasoning ability to respond to that?
Oh, certainly. And in fact, what I will like to show later is how quickly your cognitive faculties are degraded by even small amounts of carbon dioxide in something like a plume from a burst pipe. If you survive that, you're going to be in a bad situation anyway, cognitively.
Have you been shown any dispersion modeling from Summit?
I have not seen any dispersion modeling, and I was going to bring that up when I was going to talk about the emergency response in Greene County. I can bring it up now if you want.
Sure, go ahead.
I talked to the emergency response manager for Greene County just a couple days ago, a very helpful guy. And someone had been by to see them in the past, and briefly mentioned how to handle a carbon dioxide pipeline failure, which is basically, cordon off the area, wait till it's clear, go in with your CO2 detector, and then didn't say anything, but the implied next statement is rescue anybody that's still alive. When I was talking to the emergency manager and asked him, when someone had been in, if someone had been in to see him, the first words out of his mouth were, yes, and they didn't bring a plume analysis. So that was the first thing he said. And he's expecting to see one of those at some point, but he doesn't know when. To finish the story on the emergency response, so it promised them CO2 detectors and training, no other gear. And let's see, for the emergency response in this area, there's EMTs and fire in Grand Junction. There's that's 3 miles. There's another fire department 10 miles away with a ALS, Advanced Life Support Ambulance Service. And the nearest hazmat is 45 miles away.
Where would that be?
Fort Dodge.
Okay. So, perhaps I missed it, but your property's in Greene County?
Yes.
And are you closer to Boone or closer to Jefferson?
Closer to Jefferson. Jefferson is about 10 miles. Boone is about 30 miles.
Okay.
Make that 24 miles.
So the local emergency response in your area there, you have some concern about that?
The emergency manager said that actually at Grand Junction, which is 3 miles south, he thought that was relatively good in terms of the volunteer fire department and the fact that there's a EMT station there. There's another department 8 or 10 miles to the north, which is significantly undermanned, and that wouldn't be of any help. He did say that in emergency response to a pipeline fracture, the total number of people mustered to the site would probably be around 20, but that would include sheriffs and fire and EMTs.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have.
Ms. Grunhagen?
Thank you. I just have a couple more questions about your alternative route. If they could back out of the KMZ a little bit more so we can see further south. Okay, thank you. Now, you identified the landowner to the south has consented to moving the route up against the railroad tracks?
That would have been his preference, yes.
Okay, is that your preference?
Yes.
Okay. And how far south does he own, I guess is my question.
I believe he owns to the south edge of that dark green crop.
And so does the Lewis Dreyfus plant own south of there then?
No. South of that, I think it belongs to Randy Jewett. And then south of that, there are some other landowners.
Okay, but it looks like there's the beginning of it is at the Lewis Dreyfus plant right there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so is the landowner then that owns the land around there consented to moving it close to the railroad tracks?
That I don't know. I can't imagine that he would object, but we haven't contacted him. Because it would be easy to curve that pipeline around and follow that small drainage ditch. You can see it just around the north end of the track loop. Yeah, so you pull the pipeline around, follow that drainage ditch, and just go straight on up.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions.
Okay. Mr. Jorde, for redirect.
Sir, do you know if you or your tenants sell any corn to that ethanol plant?
I did not know. My sister, Elizabeth, who goes by Beth, who's up next, may know.
Okay, very good. Frankly, I think the questioning was so thorough, Doctor, that I don't have any further questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Gunion. We appreciate it. Have a good night. Mr. Jorde?
Yes, we would call Elizabeth Tribble.